join that with our business users. I'm your host, Brandon Barnes, and my co-host is
Nathan Taylor.
awesome. Nathan, today's guest, I'm gonna let you kick him off and introduce him.
Awesome. Well, today's guest is Shel Phillips, good friend of mine from the Portland area, and we've been we've been talking technology and security and CMMC and all sorts of topics. And wonderful person. Just enjoyed being a good friend in the industry, Shel. So happy to have you. You want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Sure. I'm, as you said, Shel Phillips. I'm the Chief Security and Compliance Officer for an MSP here in Portland, Covenant Technology Solutions, and for our consulting arm, Covenant Global. And we do primarily CMMC consulting. I do sort of the compliance consult part, and Covenant Technology does enclave builds and so on. So we're our toe is more than dipped into the pool.
Yes. You were working with us a couple years ago when we were trying to get ahead of it, and always have had a good voice. You are also involved in some of the industry orgs around CMMC, like MSP CyberX, and you've got a CMMC peer group. So you're always investing in the space. So much appreciated inviting us into that, and just sharing your knowledge. You've always been so good about that. So. We had an episode about CMMC, kind of talked about it high level a couple weeks ago with Jim, and thought that was really great to kind of dig into that. But there was a big announcement in the last couple weeks that changed some of the things. So, Shel, if you wouldn't mind, give us your, 5-sentence overview of what CMMC is, and then talk about the changes that came out in the last few weeks. There's a small ask right there. Just take this giant topic and turn it into a couple sentences.
Yeah, we could go hours on this topic, but in a couple sentences, CMMC is the result of 800-171, the Department of Defense requirement to protect controlled unclassified information. That has been in force since about 2017, 15, 16, 17. People have been self-attesting for the past, 8-10 years. And the problem is they are not telling the truth. They are attesting to higher scores than they probably would be allotted. And the DoD has said, well, we don't trust you anymore. We need to have you certified. We need to have a third-party assessor figure out if you really are protecting controlled unclassified information. So that's kind of where CMMC comes in. It's the cybersecurity maturity model certification. That's what CMMC stands for. And like I said, it's the final evolution of the 800-171 requirements.
Awesome. And these have been in a draft stage these have been worked on for 4 or 5 years, right? These are things that have been kind of have evolved and changed and looked one way, and then they'll come out with an update. But recently, these rules have been pretty much codified, right? Is that a fair statement?
That's right. Yeah. So it was being first there was 1.0 came out in about 1920. 19 or 20, and it was quickly revised in 2021 to 2.0, where they actually made it match 800-171. And then there's been discussion on it up until recently. And as of, I think, June, July, then discussion was closed and they had 90 days to put it in effect. It was signed and published on October 15th. And so it is now a real thing.
Okay.
It's now a real thing, huh?
Yep. It is real.
Well, let's talk about how it's real, and then I'd love to have you break down some of the things that changed with the recent update. So,
okay.
Yeah, CMMC is basically a set of security rules, and the way it's going to be enforced is it's tied to government contracts, right? So if you want to get paid, even as a subcontractor on a government contract, you're making bolts as a machine shop, and those bolts get sold to Boeing, and then Boeing puts them in a fighter jet and sells it to the government. In order for you to get paid for those bolts, you're now going to need to comply with some level of CMMC to control the data you have around those bolts. Is that a
Well, let's
Fair
make a
assessment?
clarification there. Some bolts you can buy over the counter, and those are not controlled. But if there's some kind of mil spec or the very specialty, or there's a contract out to make it a certain way, and in that contract there's a requirement to meet 204.7012, that's the CMMC requirement. And so if that's in the contract, then yes, the information about that bolt has to be protected. And so that's
Or you won't be able to get paid.
right.
Yeah,
Well, you
which
won't
is
even get the contract. Yeah.
which you won't get the contract. So that's where the teeth are coming, and
Right. Right.
and the primes are all starting to look for CMMC certified partners, even just to pull you in.
Right.
How many businesses across America is this likely to impact?
Well, initially it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 85,000 to 100,000. There's several hundred thousand in the defense industrial base, and then if you count their helpers, the MSPs, managed service providers, there's probably another a doubling of that number at some point. Then the rest of the federal government is probably going to adopt CMMC at some
Yes.
point. So it's a really huge greenfield. And the key problem is there's only a handful of assessors who are certified right now to do the assessments. And each of these subcontractors is going to need to be assessed every 3 years, be certified every 3 years. And so if you do the math, it would take 20 years to get everybody initially certified. So it's a crazy, crazy time. I think the first phase is self-attestation, and we'll see how that plays out. Now, the key is the primes are likely going to be acting like the current cyber insurance companies, where they're demanding certain things happen. They will demand that their downstream subcontractors be certified to work with them. So they're going to clean up their own supply chain. The problem is that's probably outside of the DoD's expected timeline. So, it could be a train wreck. I hope it's not.
Well, there's some really complicated layers, right? The rule just got finalized and it's impactful. I was reading an article the other day about how to be an assessor, you've got to get through a background check, like a DoD background check. And that's, if you don't have that, that's 3, 6, 12 months, sometimes backlog to get through that.
That's correct.
So these assessors not only have to pass all the schooling and pass these exams and really have an amazing amount of subject matter expertise, then they have to get through these background checks. So there's some real wild dynamics. And as you mentioned, I also saw articles that there's a couple other branches of the government that aren't DoD focused that are going to say, for any government data, CMMC is a great framework for us to start to enforce that security on non-DoD data. Maybe it's intelligence data, or it's, the construction industry is facing this. You're building a federal building. They want controls on the building plans for that federal building. That's not CMMC, but it's likely to align with that pretty quick.
Here's an example of how far-reaching this is. Let's say you're a cement contractor. You pour cement, and the local Air Force base has asked you to resurface their runway. That is a controlled situation. You have to comply to CMMC level 2, because you'll have information about about this thickness of the runway, the composition of it, and so on. And now you have to comply, and it takes 6 months to comply. I mean, being practical,
minimum.
It takes 6 months to really get to that point where you could be certified. So it's going to be crazy, and there are so many in the SMB and small business sector who are, they're 5 people. They punch out windshield brackets for an F-35, right? They've been doing it for 10, 15 years, no problems up to this point, and now all of a sudden they're going to have to afford a $60,000, $80,000 hit just to get certified the first time, and then every 3 years, here we go again. So it's going to have great impact on the industry. It's going to have great impact on the DoD and everything in defense industrial base, I think.
How much do you think one of these, to get certified CMMC would cost the company?
For a small business, the certification, the assessment, actually is somewhere in the $35,000 to $40,000 range. That's just the assessment. The compliance and building the enclave and all that sort of thing can be $50,000 to $60,000 on the cheap side. It can be $100,000, $150,000 on the enterprise high side. So you're in that $100,000 range to get all this stuff put together. Now, the DoD has said, oh, you just add that into your contract. But everybody still is competing on price, right?
Right.
And until the market matures to the point of everybody recognizes they have these costs, it's still going to be a sort of a race to the bottom for price. And so how are you going to pay that extra 100,000 to get certified?
You're not considering what it's going to take, the tools, the security implementation to be compliant as well. If you're not,
I'm saying that an MSP should have one full-time equivalent to actually do compliance for their clients, right? And that's $100K easy, and that's just to maintain that's just for the drift, to make sure all the policies, everything's patched and everything's updated. The OSA, the organization seeking assessment themselves, we'll call them OSAs, the subcontractors, they also have to have a staff that knows how to sort of manage. There's probably 2/3 of the requirements are procedural. They're not technical. You can't just buy a solution. You actually have to do some work. There's a human involved.
Yeah.
And so someone has to do that work, whether it's probably not going to be the owner of the business. It's probably going to be somebody who should be, in my mind, should be a project manager type, technical project manager with some subject matter expertise in CMMC. Well, that's different than what's out in the marketplace. Out in the marketplace, there's a lot of techs that know how to do tech, and they know how to do security, but that's about a 30%, 40% of the whole requirement. So there's some opportunity and some challenge out there. I think it's going to be an interesting 18 months, 2 years to really sort this out and get it going.
And I like what you said there of like, I think it's really important to be aware of easy solutions to this. There's a lot of people who are like, hey, you move your data to our SaaS platform, we're going to get you through CMMC. Or, we get a lot of leads of like, hey, we're moving our entire business to Azure GovCloud and Office 365 Gov, and that's going to get us there. And, I think it's important to talk to somebody who understands the scope of it, because there's big downsides to moving your entire corporation to a government version of Office 365.
Right.
And it probably doesn't get you that much closer, because the reality is you really most likely want some sort of enclave. So your entire business doesn't need to get completely rebuilt to accomplish this. You're going to spend a lot of money doing that, and it's not going to get you much closer if you try to go down those routes. So I think it's really important to remind people to talk to multiple sources and really understand, there's no shortcuts to this. And until somebody, I've seen, there's a few people in the industry, you and I know a few of them who believe they've found shortcuts, right? Until some of them can prove they're consistently passing assessments, I'm very dubious of these shortcuts. They're just missing a lot of the details in my assessment.
Yeah, the proof will be in the pudding. It will be past assessments, certifications. And once you can start stringing those scalps on your belt, I mean, until you can do that, it's really hard to say, yes, we're the ones that can do it.
Yes.
Until you've actually done it.
So let me ask you, to dig deeper on this. So a lot of this is doom and gloom, right? I mean, I think it's going to have a lot of impact on small business in America. There's a lot of, HVAC contractors and concrete guys and maintenance guys that are going to go, what do you mean I'm a 4-person HVAC vendor and I can't maintain my big contract with the military base? No, everything you do has to be CMMC. It's a real challenge, and I think there's going to be some interesting workarounds of like, hey, you go subcontract somebody and they become your CMMC. There's some workarounds.
We should probably talk about some strategies about that, because in fact, when the final rule was signed, it eliminated the absolute need for an MSP, managed service provider, to be certified. In other words, you can operate as long as you work under the auspices of the OSA, actually adhering to their controls, using their equipment, almost like a staff augmentation. You can still be an MSP without being certified.
That's huge.
There's ways to do that. And if you understand the regulations and have gone through the 470 pages of the rule itself as it was signed, there's some research to be done and some knowledge to be had. And I think you'll see a key resources, Bobby Guerrera, Climbing Mount CMMC. He has some great podcasts that talk about a lot of these aspects. He just did one on MSPs and the impact on them. And FedRAMP, he did a great one on FedRAMP certification. Originally, when the rule was under review, it looked like external service providers would have to be FedRAMP certified, FedRAMP moderate certified.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of modification on that. There's some things that you have to go through, but and it looked like it was going to eliminate a lot of tools. A lot of the tools that we use for security, that we use for monitoring, we use for SIM, SOC, that sort of thing, they were not going to be able to be used. But it turns out in the final rule, if they do not handle any controlled unclassified information at all, it's not stored there, it's not passed through or whatever, then they don't have to meet that requirement. But security protection data, okay, was also going to be a controlled class of information, and that's what took MSPs directly into certification. That too, if handled properly, kept on the client site, dealt with over there. If you don't handle it as an MSP, you don't have some of the requirements that were there for SPD. So there's a lot of detail, and people say, "Well, I got it. We got this figured out." There's a lot to know. There's a lot to know and a lot to be aware of.
Yeah. What else changed with the final announcement? So I knew that was one of them, where there was more room for subcontractors not have to, an MSP becoming CMMC level 3 certified was a monumental ask. And so them taking away some of that, where as an MSP, here's some opportunities for you to follow some rules and still support your clients. It's a big moment. What other things came with that final decision?
Well, I think we've hit most of them. The external service provider requirements, MSP certification, the definition and requirements around security protection data. Those were the big ones. The timeline has been extended now. Originally, It was going to be 6 months from signing that you had to be certified, right? Well, they initially pushed that out now 6 months. So we have a year from January to actually, for the first group to be certified. Now, defining who's in the group, and that's still up in the air. That's still, who knows? But we will begin to find out as we wade in. And it is my opinion, my advice is that MSPs who intend to support in the DoD should not decide that they're not going to get certified. They should be certified in order to actually. Inheritance has been a big thing that's come down with this final rule. If your MSP is complying in patching and all the things that they can do, the technical sides of it, if they're compliant and certified, you inherit, as an OSA, you inherit all the things that they do in that regard. Okay. Same thing with GCC High and GCC. All the things, the site protection, the data center controls, all of that is inherited, can be inherited by the OSA as well. So you can check off some boxes on that process.
Oh, interesting.
So inheritance is a big deal, and it's discussed at length in the actual final rule, 470 pages. And so it's a matter of, in my opinion, anybody that's going to play in the DoD probably should have a CCP on staff, or should have a very close friend that knows what the requirements are, or even a C3PO in their backyard, because there's too much to know and too many easy ways. And the teeth in all of this is the False Claims Act of 1865. Okay, that's back when Lincoln and the Union Army was getting supplies, horse meat and leather and all those sorts of things. Suppliers were giving them shoddy equipment, so they call it the Lincoln Act. They enacted a law that says if you falsely claim that you're giving them some level of quality on their equipment, you can be fined up to treble damages of the contract. So that's still in force today. That's the teeth in CMMC 800-171 False Claims Act, and whistleblowers can actually blow the whistle and make a large pot of money on some of these contracts. So you can't just pretend you're following the rules. You have to follow the rules.
So are you saying that whistleblowers can make money on that?
I'm afraid I'm saying that. Yep.
That's going to change the game a bit.
Well,
we've all been in a customer. It's kind of funny because one of my first jobs as a systems engineer was actually for USGS, and we had to follow NIST every year. And so, what would you say? Going through the NIST checklist, and of course, me being the grunt had to do a legwork on that, and that was insane. But what would you say the big difference between NIST compliance and CMMC is?
Certification. I mean, bottom line, certification. You actually have to have a third party look at you rather than you looking at yourself and saying, "Yeah, I'm doing all these things." I mean, I just recently had a client. We did a gap analysis. Their government agency talked them through their SPURS report, their supplier risk system report that they have to supply. And they gave themselves a score of 100. And I did a gap analysis and they had a score of minus 204. They didn't, they got 0 points. And so the point is that people have been sort of doing this for years. And the DoD, I think, assumed originally that everybody was following the rules and that all they needed was a certification laid on top. Yeah, you're doing fine. Here you go. And it would only cost you $50,000, $40,000. You're all set. But unfortunately, we're finding out that everybody is basically starting from scratch. And that's why it's such a crazy big lift.
Yeah. So talk us through, you mentioned there's some strategies for navigating this. And I know you and I've talked about a couple of those. There's some, creative scenarios and ways to get through this, because this hits, we got a call in last year from a guy who's like, "Hey, I'm a parts reseller. I have no data. Everything I resell is commercially available. My contracts are public contracts, but I can't get paid unless I'm CMA certified." So none of his data is technically controlled, right? It's all public data, but the contract itself stipulated he had to have CMMC certification for a one-man shop with no office that just does, pass through. This is the world we live in, so he had to go figure that out. So talk through some of the, edge cases and ways you can, navigate some of this to some workarounds.
Yeah, that's an interesting scenario. What I would want to do first is look at its contract and just verify that in fact 7012 was in there, the DFAR that says you have to follow CMMC. I would check for that very first. If they were just told they had to be certified, well, I would say, show me the contract, and if it says that, okay, we'll go from there. What we do is we can build simplistic enclaves where if they had any controlled unclassified information, or were going to potentially, they could put it in there and we could protect it. I have a client right now that I'm working with that does the very same thing. He handles contracts, he outsources, and just basically handles the paperwork. So we built him an enclave to put anything that might be labeled as CUI. He can put it up in there and do his work. He's going to comply with all the controls and configurations and everything. He's going to comply, and we'll get him to the point where he can self-attest that he's following those. And that's the cool thing right now is we probably have a year time where self-attestation is okay for level 2. But then we'll see how it goes going forward if he has to do more. And if he does, then we'll line up a C3PO to do certification. So there's a way to sort of wade into it without most of us last year were thinking there's just a big wall coming in. We're just going to smash into it and get going and do it now. But it looks like it's going to be ramped a bit so that we don't have this big crisis. But for small people, the very first place to start is with the contract. Do you have a requirement that you have to do this? If you do, then there are ways to do it. Now, historically, there have been a lot of consultants at the enterprise level charging enterprise prices for this. So it was a big number. I mean, it was 6 figures easy to get compliant. But the moms and pops were left out of that because they cannot afford that. It's just not possible. So Covenant, we've downsized and scaled the projects down so that it's affordable. So we have what I would consider to be a conservative price tag on our process so that it is affordable. I think people are going to have to do that in the marketplace in order to meet all the needs that are out there. Now, that being said, I don't think I have a competitor in the marketplace doing consulting and compliance. There's too much to do and too few of us doing it. So I just don't, I run my own peer group of CMMC people that are either C3POs, assessors, or MSPs that are working towards certification. And we share openly how we're doing it, what we're doing. The crazy thing is there's nothing listed. There's no rule book, no recipe, no nothing of how to actually get through an assessment and survive. It's going to be anecdotal. Did you make it through? Yeah. How did you do it? I don't know.
Right.
It's going to be
right.
Going to be that way. It's just we got lucky. We found the right assessor, and we made it. I mean, there's no written rules on here's the formula for doing it. So it's going to be great.
And that's where I think there's a lot of value in like the MSP CyberX, your peer group, these podcasts. Like Bobby's podcast is great. Summit 7 has one. There's a couple people out there doing really good content.
Yep.
It's such a learning curve. I've tried to kind of dig into it, and it's just a lot. And I'm with you. I think it's going to come down to, these 4 people have passed 5 certifications. They have some tips, and then everybody starts building on their experience, and then you start to get a body of knowledge of how people are successfully navigating this. How about the work around, I think you mentioned this to me in a previous conversation, that there also can be some scenarios where you can say, great, I'm just going to get, I'm a subcontractor, but I really don't need this data all over the place. I'm just going to use a device from my prime, and they're going to certify the device. We talked about that as maybe a workaround in certain situations where maybe you can kind of fall under their coverage because you're doing a very small thing and the prime is able to cover you. What does that look like in the new ruling?
It looks just like you described it. You use equipment that is compliant under the provider's auspice. Same thing's true with government equipment. Sometimes they'll give you a computer to use, that sort of thing, that only has access to certain locations and data. That's one way to do it, where you actually sit under sort of the compliance of the prime, if you will, and just manage it that way. You have one laptop in house and on a separate network, and you access the data that you need to access. That is a way to do it. You wouldn't have to be certified. You would fall under. You would inherit the certification but it would not certify the rest of your activity. It would not say, okay, since you're working for these guys, you don't have certification by inheritance. You have to actually gain it. Now, the second thing, which I alluded to earlier, is what I would call staff augmentation, where you would actually provide a tech to go on site physically, sit at their computer, at the OSA's computer, work on their CUI if you had to, or at least work on their systems around CUI and do the work, and then you would leave. In that scenario, you'd follow all the rules as if you were an employee. You would, in a sense, be a subcontracted employee, and you would follow all the rules and do the work and then exit. And that then the MSP providing the tech would not have to be certified in that case. Okay. So staff aug or using the prime's equipment and infrastructure, those are 2 ways that you can get around certification.
Yeah, and I think what that all is alluding to is a concept that we don't use a lot of in our space, but it's got to be top of mind when you're digging into this, which is enclave scoping, really defining the boundaries, right? We often, especially in the small business space, we think of these businesses as these monolith. Anything I do, I'm doing for everybody, right? They're all running SentinelOne. They're all on Office 365. They all have Windows laptops. They all, use this. And I think, in many ways, the only way to survive some of these challenges is to say, no, this is not for everybody. We are going to on purpose scope people, devices, data. We're going to segregate the data. This is CUI data. This is sensitive data. This is not. Different systems, different, a lot of layers. Because if you can scope it down, and that scoping is not, in some spaces, scoping is used to, like, the legendary one is SOC 2 compliance. Oh, we scoped our way to SOC 2 compliance. How? Well, we just cut down the scope to where we could pass. Well, you didn't actually drive any real security. You just scoped your way into a certification you could put on your website. Yeah. It's questionable about whether it drove, your company's security. And that may be true of CMMC. Hey, we're CMMC certified. Great. Is the rest of your business secure? Oh, we haven't touched it. Right. That is the downside of the scoping. But in my mind, that's a way of thinking that we'll all have to adapt to say, the only way you're going to navigate this is by figuring out how to scope the people, the processes, the data, and the systems down. Because you just can't spread it across most large businesses. They can't be CMMC compliant across their entire business. It's very difficult.
The case in point is an MSP. I mean, how many tools do they use? What kind of data do they access? How do the APIs work? I mean, there's so many holes in that environment that it's really hard to certify an MSP in that sense. I think DoD MSPs are going to probably have to isolate the crew that's going to do the work from the rest of their commercial business. They're either going to have to start a second MSP or very heavily isolate the people. Not likely that they could use the same laptop to access both systems, because it's just not the way it works.
Right, to be in a GCC high tenant, I can see that being in a very different realm.
Yeah.
So
that's how we're setting it up.
I guess one of my questions too is, if I'm a business owner and I'm do some government contracts, I mean, unlike GDPR, and like, how would you get fined? Like, how would you get in trouble if you're not certified? They just not pay you, or is there other things that they could actually affect you?
You actually would lose the contract. You would no longer be compliant with the contract, and therefore you'd lose it. They'd put it out to somebody else who is compliant. So it's a big dollar loss. If you falsely claim that you're meeting all these things, you could potentially run afoul of the False Claims Act, and you could,
right,
be subject to up to 3 times, treble damages on the contract itself, the whole contract.
Litigation, possibly.
Yeah, it's I mean, there's so many more people looking over the shoulder now. So,
obviously, I know most government entities are NIST compliant, or have to be to some sense NIST compliant. How soon do you think CMC will take over and become the new standard?
Yeah. I can't even make that prediction. I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, I bet you it's going to fall suit pretty quick. That's my guess.
Yeah, I don't even know how long before CMMC settles in. It's hard to predict. There's so many unknowns and so many things that we just have to experience before. I mean, look at the whole government infrastructure. What if things change and how they make their decisions? What if, who knows? Who knows? I think we just have to go day to day and sort of use our best knowledge, talk to a lot of people, and keep abreast of it. That's the key thing, is stay involved, stay informed, and just keep your ear to the ground and make your best effort. I mean, we always go back to the reasonable man defense. Why did you do X, Y, Z? At the time, I figured that it was the most reasonable thing to do. I made an attempt, and so on and so forth. And you have to give it your best shot. And so predicting when everybody else is the whole world's gonna go to CMMC, I don't know if that'll ever happen.
I hear what you're saying.
But I agree, it's hard to predict, but I am seeing the conversations in the news.
I see conversations all the time.
Different government orgs really starting to talk about it. So
yeah. And from my perspective, I'm really thinking of customers that aren't just DoD, specific.
Right.
It's how do you get ahead of, I already have, a contract with USGS or, any other part of Interior, something else something that you would have.
Yes.
And trying to get ahead of that, right? So
Yep.
It's coming regardless. It's
I agree.
Compliance is coming regardless.
Yep.
I mean, I mentioned the construction industry. That's something that's happening now
Yeah.
where the federal government's saying, hey, you have plans for our new federal building. You got to keep them secure. I don't think there's structure around that at the right level, very much like CMMC has been of like, secure it. You're in charge of this, you know. But I think very quickly they're going to go, let's not reinvent the wheel. The structure's been built, and once it's working for the DoD, it'll trickle down, I think.
Yep.
And I think this enclave idea is going to end up being a very common thing. You know, it's just
Yep.
going to have
Yep.
to be how people approach it.
I think that's
So.
true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Shell, it's always a pleasure. Amazing content. I mean, this is just going to be, we're going to be able to talk about this every month for years now, because it's going to be, every time we talk with you, you're going to have a new insight into
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
I do encourage people who have an interest or need to learn about this to connect with some of the groups out there. As you mentioned, you've got a podcast, Shell, on CMMC that you do periodically.
Yeah, I've been on LinkedIn. I actually do. I put out things that are not just pronouncements like I know it all, but there are things that I run into in my consulting practice. Things I mean, people don't know what's coming with an assessment. It's a sort of a black box, and so I did a video on what that might be like. I actually interviewed an assessor. What does an assessment look like, or what's Covenant's methodology? How do we even approach it? Where do we start? Things like that. Things that are kind of back in the back corners of the topic. And remember, there's three types of players in the CMMC marketplace. There's the MSPs themselves that actually give IT support, outsourced IT support. There are consultants like myself who actually help people get compliant by doing the documentation and the tech and all that sort of thing. And then there are assessors. And those are the three categories. And those are the types of people that I'm collecting in my peer group to talk about these things. And the fun thing is I get to ask questions of assessors without having to pay for it.
It's good.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other orgs I already mentioned, MSP CyberX is a group that seems to be working hard to share data.
Yep.
Are you on the board of that? You're definitely
Yes, I'm
deeply
a board
involved
member of
on the board.
CyberX.
I do recommend checking that out. And then Climbing Mount CMMC with Bobby Guerra. That's a really great podcast, and he produces a couple episodes a week. He's pretty active.
Yeah. Another group to watch is Kieri, Kieri. Amira Armand. She's very knowledgeable about the whole topic, does a lot of informational conversations. She's got a YouTube channel, Kieri.com. And they also sell a great set of templates for CMMC. So
that's really good to know.
Yep.
And then Summit 7 has some great content as well.
7.
They're another larger org that's really, they put out some really good content as well. So something to keep yourself educated on, and keep a thumb on. Well, Shell, thank you as always for your time. Thank you for your investment in the community. You work hard to give back, and it means a lot to. We all appreciate it very much. So thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Shell, it's been nice meeting you. I just let you know, I have met with Covenant before, and I know that they do. They talk to MSPs, right? And I implore other MSPs out there to really think about this, because I think you guys have been way ahead of the curve and no one's been listening for quite some time. So I recommend that. And we'll put your information on the website or on the posting. Great. And just kind of let everyone know to reach out if they need to talk to Shell. I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah. We think we're out there. We are out there many times in a goofy way, but we took it seriously, and we decided, okay, this is a business we can do. It's a big green field. So yeah, we embrace it. But I teach class with Matt Lee for PAX 8 about how to write policies and documentation. And for me, it's all about helping. And that's sort of our approach. We want to help, not cool. Get rich. Co-opetition, right? We don't need to be. There's plenty of work. You're not my competition. You're my co-opetition. Let's make each other better. I love it. Yeah. Awesome. Good stuff. Good to meet you, Brandon. You too. We're gonna wrap it up. Really appreciate having you on, Shell, and I hope we have you again, because I know this is gonna keep changing and shifting and morphing. So any updates we can get, we have. So Our listeners, thank you for listening. Thanks for taking the time. And don't forget to like, subscribe, make comments, thumbs up, and listen to us more. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time, Shaw.
Okay.
Thank you.